And we're live. Here we are here in Ottawa for another podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Persicino, and I'm here joined with my guest, my very good friend, Graham Killaire. So, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while since we had you on, but
it's been a minute. It's been a quick minute.
Yeah. So there's always new developments going on. Life goes on pretty quickly. So why don't you tell me what you've been up to and anything you've learned in the past few months?
Well, what I've been up to, class, basically. Class
Of course,
CQP.
yeah.
Finishing up my courses for my master's. Starting my take-home exam tomorrow, so that's going to be fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're almost done, so you have one more year of your master's to do?
Yeah. I actually have my 1 year mark is May 1st. So
Okay.
almost halfway through.
Very good.
We'll see how that goes.
Nice. So let's really get into some of the topics that we can really dive into. Recently, there have been a lot of new developments with, I guess that new telescopes and new engineering in space technology. So I guess there's a lot of really cool development. The Falcon Heavy or the 9, was it?
Falcon Heavy.
The Falcon Heavy, right?
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting launch to see, and that's only right now, and then now you have a new government contracts to do even more development with SpaceX. So there's a lot really going on in that field.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Did you hear about, I think it was it Israel that tried to land on the moon recently?
Yeah.
And then the lander's engines misfired or something on
Mm-hmm.
landing? They almost joined the club. What would have, they would have been the third, right?
Yeah, America, China, and then, they would have been them.
Beating Russia to the moon, eh? really trying to get there. But yeah, the Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy.
Yeah.
Falcon 9 was one before it, I think, wasn't it? Something like that.
It's one of the
But yeah,
prototypes.
What was it? The heaviest weight, if I remember rightly. That's why it was the Falcon Heavy. I know
Mm-hmm.
it looked like a beast.
Yeah, the biggest and the most that you have the most propulsion. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that kind of ties in with your theory on disposing of waste. But you were talking about that time.
I mean, at some point, I feel like if space travel is going to be a tourist thing and it's going to be more feasible, it's going to be a very smart option to, the best alternative to disposing of our waste would be to vaporize it in the sun's nebula. So basically, you just send it in that general direction and it'll be vaporized. So, in the long term, that might be a good solution to get rid of nuclear waste. I mean, to me, it's the cleanest option that, maybe at some point we'll have the technology to do that.
Yeah, I guess one of the issues with that is just space debris in general can be extremely dangerous, just to keep throwing debris.
Oh, absolutely.
There.
And it wouldn't be just to throw out in random space. It would be, targeted probes towards the sun that would be vaporized.
Yeah,
that would be the goal like that. Yeah,
I could see it if it was done the right way, yeah, but it'd definitely be expensive, at least as we are right now.
Oh, well, of course. And, now we're in the stages of, being in the stages where they want to mine asteroids and they want to bring down asteroids that they can mine. Right. And so it's becoming more and more feasible to do outlandish things like that. And, we don't know what point we'll be able to. And now that we have AI and robot technology advancing, we don't even need to send humans to do all this work. We can just send robots to do all the work. And that, it's way more efficient than, sending hamsters in a giant hamster cage to go do work when you can have robots that don't need food or oxygen. You basically just send them enough battery life and they're good to go for a while. So they're the pros and cons of using technology to our advantage in those kinds of missions. But,
I do want to loop back onto one thing, though, that one of the advantages of the concept of space mining versus sending waste to space is that you're sending something lighter out and bringing something heavy back. It's easier to bring mass in because you don't have to provide energy to bring it in. But it's kind of the opposite problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get something off the planet, or hard to get something off the planet, easy to get something back. So it's a lot easier to, for example, go out with an empty hauler to bring back something from an asteroid
Sure.
than it would be to send something heavy out.
Sure.
In terms of propulsion, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because if we have technologies now that are being developed to clean the oceans with filtration systems, that buoys systems that would be put into the current systems, so that all the trash would go through those kinds of the filters, which is really, really intelligent. And at some point, maybe they'll have some kind of similar technologies for, the space debris and the space belt that, around the Earth.
Yeah, well, I know it's definitely something people have worked on. I think I remember hearing about some sort of capture device that NASA was working on or something, because the idea of Kessler syndrome has always been a big thing that's always been discussed. You're familiar with it, right?
I don't think I am, no.
Essentially, you have tons of satellites orbiting around Earth.
Yeah.
And the idea is that when one of them breaks into shrapnel, it's kind of like firing a shotgun. And then each piece of shrapnel can start a new explosion, and it becomes a chain reaction, and then all of the satellites essentially vaporize into a cloud of space debris.
Interesting.
And you become essentially locked on your planet because the atmosphere around you is all debris moving at extremely high speeds.
Wow.
I don't know if you've ever seen those damage, what an aluminum plate looks like when it's hit by like a tiny little speck of space dust at a certain speed, and it's this giant crater in it. Picture all the satellites turning into a giant minefield, essentially.
And I guess that's kind of to show how fragile this can be and how close to the board this can all become. And that's totally a possibility, just like the getting to this type 1 civilization kind of theory, where we become interplanetary, where we have a civilization that's beyond one planet, and that's intergalactic, which is which would be interesting, but I don't think we're anywhere near that at this point.
If I remember rightly, aren't the civilization types based on energy usage?
I think it's I believe it is, which would be
type 1 is like all the energy on your planet or something, and then type 2 is all the energy in your system, and then type 3 is all the energy in the universe or galaxy, something like that. It's something along those lines, but I know depending on the formulation, but it's roughly that kind of idea. So it's like a Dyson sphere is type 2, I think, in theory.
I mean, this is where it gets really complicated, and it's, I guess that's the whole paradox, where are we alone, or is there alien life? And, how many societies get to the point where, they are on the brink of getting to type 1 or type 2, and, they fumble and fall, and they can't redeem themselves because their politics overwhelms them, and their selfishness takes over.
Well, it might not necessarily be politics. What happens if you get slugged with a giant meteor?
It could be chaos. It could be politics. It could be
plague.
The culture. Yeah, it could be a virus. Yeah, it could be a lot of things. And I guess that's the whole point of the chaos of the universe, and just how fragile life can be, and how we can we should really pay attention to everything that's going on, and really trying to protect the Earth, and trying to see if we can actually have a defense mechanism. And I mean, it's funny to think that the United States they're wanting to have the Space Force, and they're kind of tearing up their international treaties on militarizing space. But I guess
it's always that no one else follows the treaty, so they don't have to, or something.
That's
like
the
that.
classic argument for literally every single treaty that happens. What
was that article you sent me where it was?
Oh, the very biased article by RT that was saying, that was blaming America for literally everything, including their own undoing.
Well,
and
it wasn't just that. It was just I found it wasn't necessarily the way them blaming America so much as I just found that their take on Russia and China was just interesting because they said basically that Russia and China were promoting peace in space, and then said, but they have better space combat technology than the U.S. does because they did it already.
Yeah.
But they're promoting peace. And I'm just like, but didn't you just say they weren't doing it? And said they were doing it. And
Yeah.
so I just found that the article was worded in a really weird way. It almost seemed like there was two articles put together that the authors didn't speak to each other. And I found it really strange. Like, it like split at the halfway mark. Where the beginning was talking about the Chinese and the Russians promoting peace and that the U.S. backed out of the treaty.
Yeah.
The second half of it goes off about how and the U.S. is behind already. Well, how did they get behind if no one else was doing it before?
And that's the really the truth about international politics nowadays, and it's kind of really an awkward position for, you know, America and the West world to be in, is that, you know, obviously there's a lot of undermining going on and a lot of, you know, wars of attrition, or, you know, the idea that people are working behind the scenes to make things happen regardless if it's legal or not. And that's kind of the world we live in. And the world is more than just states. It's more that it's interstate, international platform, right? So people have to work together, and there is a balance of power, and there are kind of things that go on behind closed doors, and that's kind of really the nitty gritty. And, you know, that, you know, Trump and the Chinese government and all these things, they kind of have to play with each other, and you know, always with the international, with the public interest and the public view in play. You know, they're always talking about having the ethical upper hand, saying, you know, always saying, just like with the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Oh, you guys are impeding on the Western freedom. Oh, well, no, you guys are impeding on the independence of Cuba. Oh, well, they're, you know, classic back and forth security dilemma. Classic. You know, you're militarizing for militarizing, not for defense. And, you know, there's always that that's always going to be the argument for, you know.
Yeah, well, and then you also get the argument about the fact that, well, why is the U.S. allowed to have missiles parked right beside Russia, but Russia's not allowed to have missiles near the U.S., and there was that whole debate. I believe specifically missiles in Turkey were one of the highlights of the discussions during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Of course, and we can see now how Turkey is a very, very different scenario now than it was back then, and
yeah,
you know how the powers change.
After the coup attempt years ago, I believe we removed, not we, but NATO removed nuclear weapons from Turkey, if I remember rightly.
That's really interesting. There's a lot of different places right now going on with, you know, obviously with North Korea, and it's really ironic that North Korea just had an election where
they did it.
They had an election, and he won by a landslide, ironically.
Well, who votes? Him, his dog, some of their friends, I assume.
Well, maybe there's just no opponents on the ballot. Who knows? I don't really know much about their inner workings. They don't really let people know.
It's a yes/no ballot where both answers are yes. You can pick one.
No, when you pick no, it automatically goes to yes.
You can pick one or two or both. But
it's yes or also yes, or none of the above, which gets you in trouble.
No one votes none of the above, though. No one votes none of the above.
Yeah. It's a test, right? That's the whole point.
See that's the real elections. The elections aren't to elect the governors, it's to elect which citizens get to stay.
That's very terrifying. Well, it's China's already having a credit system on social behavior and your you know, morality stance and your jaywalking, so it's not far off.
It's kind of interesting because China, you can kind of see some of the more frightening applications that people in the Western world have talked about for the applications of some of this new technology and just the sheer amount of data that's being collected on people. And it's kind of intriguing because you always hear that, oh, well, it's not going to get used for that, but it is.
Well,
it's just not here.
That the most worrying thing is that it's Google working in partnership with them, and you know, it's like, oh well, if we're not gonna partner up with them and do it, they're just gonna circumvent us and do it.
I don't think Google's working with them on the credit system. I think they're working with them on
the surveillance part.
I think it's more on aren't they creating a Google server that has filtered out results that the Chinese government doesn't want to be there, so it's kind of like Google Lite or something like that. I believe that's how I remember hearing them. They're working on a new browser or something that would work in China.
Essentially censoring the entire internet sphere.
Yeah, well, it's already censored.
It's already censored because they already have their own version of the WhatsApp, and the WhatsApp is already controlled. You know, the government can see all your text messages right off the bat. So, you know, that's a little worrisome, and especially for people in the West, when you travel to these countries, obviously they confiscate your outside phones and they give you state phones, or they tell you to buy internal phones and stuff like that, because obviously you can't use your own internet devices most of the time.
You're telling me Rogers doesn't have towers in China?
Well, of course they do, but I'm talking about, I guess, if they're visiting more.
What do you mean? Of course they do.
Well, they share. Don't we share towers with international companies?
That doesn't mean Rogers has the towers. It just means that you can use them. That's what roaming is when you're on someone else's own towers that don't belong to your cell network. So you have to pay a fee because they have to pay a fee to get.
Maybe it's different in China. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of the. I'm not too familiar with
how they can control the internet from your roaming fees. That's interesting. There's a lot going on in the cybernetic world.
Honestly, it's definitely not something I'm altogether that familiar with as Chinese politics or social life, particularly. I'm not too familiar with it. Yeah. Never been there, so.
Yeah, no, neither have I. I've only, read a lot of articles and, talked to people.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of articles around China nowadays.
It's becoming a lot more worrisome, and it's becoming a lot more of an interesting subject to talk about, how Canada's influence and Canada's position is with China, because now just an article recently came out that China was a threat to the Canada's economy, and that's kind of a.
You can't say that about basically every country, though. Canada's economy's not really doing too well.
Yeah. Pretty much, and there's a lot of factors, but it's definitely true that China is a major player, and the fact that we don't have very good relations right now is not helping the situation that we have. And I mean, there's always other global politics that are making like
the
the economy
U.S.
different.
signing a free trade deal and then continuing to impose tariffs.
Yeah, things like that really don't help Canada's dollar.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the dollar at right now?
72, 71.
I was going to be like, is it still low 80s? Okay, it's like 72. It's low 70s.
Yeah. It's not very good, but...
yeah, I haven't checked the conversion in a while.
It could be doing a lot better. But we were supposed to be hitting a recession regardless. That has been long predicted. So, we're just going to have to roll with the punches and try and improve it somehow.
Yeah, that's all you can do, right?
That means buy now. You buy during the recession.
Yeah, that works if you...
that works if you have money
to
begin with. Yeah. So if you're starting from nothing, but that's the best part. If you started from nothing, then you didn't lose anything.
So
because
for all you kids out there, just play the adventure capitalist. It's exactly how real life works.
Oh, and the $1.66.
Oh my God.
That's a winner. We get a winner over here.
60. Wow.
The American, yeah.
Wow. That's a big jump since what was it, like a month ago? Or 72, 70?
Do you remember
wow.
back in 2010 when it was like $1.15.
Yeah, that was because America was doing really bad and Canada did a really good job not getting out of the recession. So, yeah,
You
I
mean
don't know.
not going too deep into the recession?
Not going too deep into the recession. Yeah, pretty much.
Getting out of it's been a little steeper, but
Yeah, economy is not my side line of expertise. That's for sure.
That would have been Michael Nash's.
Oh my god.
That would have been his expertise. Get him back on podcast 2.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to talk about economy policies for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting. All right, so I guess let's talk about maybe more about something you want to focus on. Do you have anything you want to bring up?
Guide me. I feel like you got a good flow going.
Well, I mean, we can really talk about the new discovery of the black hole, and that's always a really interesting thing to look about.
Yeah, that was actually really cool. I haven't looked too much into the details, but what is it? Basically, they waited for it to pass in front of something, and then they took a picture of it, so kind of like taking a negative image of the black hole.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, the Kepler telescope, I don't think is no longer functional. They're launching a new one. Do you know anything about the new one coming out?
I know it's supposed to be massive, or at least the mirror.
I think it's called the Juno. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
I think it has it's supposed to have a much larger range as well in terms of the amount of the sky that it can look at, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting. And there was, what was it? There was also the Mars rover that died.
Oh, yeah. Was it Curiosity?
Yeah.
Oh, the
that was
cute
so
one
cute.
that's like its birthday.
Yeah. That's so cute.
Oh,
well,
it lasted well longer than it was supposed
to.
Exactly.
So it's always nice to see that, and hopefully we'll see humans on Mars soon.
Yeah, it's going to be Elon Musk and a Tesla.
That's the dream. That's basically.
He's just going to roll out of the Falcon Heavy and just like start doing donuts on the surface. They're going to have a custom Tesla with a domed like oxygen over the main part of the car.
Exactly. Yeah. It's going to be terrific, and he'll just declare himself president of Mars, and then he'll be the greatest president to ever live.
And anyone else from going, he'll bring laser weapons with him so he can shoot down anything that tries to come near his planet.
Exactly. He'll actually make a successful human colony on Mars that'll actually be it's self-sustaining. Yeah, exactly.
And then he's going to found the Weyland-Yutani Corporation.
Oh my goodness.
They will explore the stars.
I feel like this is going to be like Andrew Ryan's Rapture City. Except it's going to be Elon Musk.
It's your strength that brought you here.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
There are no gods on Mars. Well,
only man.
I guess Mars was a god, depending on your denomination. So no offense intended on that.
Yeah, pretty much.
If there's any pagans or Romans out there.
Yeah, pretty much. So, I saw that I guess for nuclear energy and fusion energy, there's always been really cool articles coming out saying, oh, it's just on the edge. We're really close. But why aren't we there, Graham? What's the holdup? And I remember we were talking about this in the car, and you were just complaining you were very passionate about the fact that we're not funding it enough. So please make the case why we're not funding it enough.
If you look at any of the statements, the thing that they always say with fusion is, provided you give us X amount of funding, fusion is 10 years away. And the joke is always, fusion's always 10 years away. And the reason is because they always say, if you give us X billion dollars, then we can do it in 10 years. And then everyone goes, oh, you want X billion? How about X over 100 billion? So 1/100th of what you asked for.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, well, that'll be 100 times longer than 10 years. So we'll get back to you on it.
Wow.
I know there's some interesting charts, and essentially it has different graphs, and each starting point is if you give it a certain amount of funding at each different starting date, and it shows when nuclear fusion would have been, finished. And it's like if it was funded properly from the beginning, it would have been done like 40 years ago. But it never received the funding it needed.
So do you think it's gonna take another kind of race between world powers for this to actually be funded, to the extent of, the ridiculous amounts that they're asking for will have to be done by people, because it'll be the only option we have? Will that be the desperate point where we'll have to do it, or do you think we'll do it before that point comes?
It really depends. The thing with science is there's always breakthroughs that can happen, right? Money just makes breakthroughs more likely. If you think about it, it's kind of investing in something is kind of like buying lottery tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more lottery tickets you buy, technically, okay, well, you might have a higher chance of winning, or 50-50 ballots, if you want to think about it in a less obtuse way.
Yeah.
The more of those tickets you buy, the larger your share, and therefore you're more likely to win. It's the same thing with research.
Yeah.
If you buy one lottery ticket, you invest $1 in research, okay, well, there's like a 1 in a million chance you'll win.
Mm-hmm.
If you invest 100, okay, well, you got 100 chances now.
Yeah.
And there's always a fluke that first ticket can win. Okay, someone just stumbled across something that worked.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is if you're gonna get that random chance, you need to put a certain amount of people, to have a certain number of people trying random things.
Sure. And I guess, we have the few hadron colliders and those kinds of tools to actually do fusion cores and stuff like that. There's a new lab that's opening up in close to Beijing, China, I believe, that they're doing I think the world's biggest hadron collider or something like that. And that's I think that, that's going to be a really big game changer for at least them to be doing something about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because those kinds of devices have ridiculous upfront costs.
Yeah.
There's been many of them that were planned and scrapped. There was a giant one they were going to build in the U.S. at one point in time that was going to go across like multiple state lines. It would have been huge.
Mm-hmm.
But it got canned years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a lot of things got canned in like the 90s and early thousands in the post-Cold War area kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, that, it's kind of the way we have.
Yeah, I know there's an article I didn't get a chance to read it, but it was talking about China starting to pull forward on technology compared to other countries, just because of the sheer amount of investment that they do. Like I said, whoever puts the most lottery tickets in, right?
Well, it certainly helps them to put literally no taxes on corporations to be doing business in Beijing and in Hong Kong. That's a really good deal that a lot of tech industries and a lot of corporations get for doing development and doing a lot of work there. It's a really big incentive, and that's
well,
really,
I find the Chinese economy is incredibly different than the economy that we are aware of here, and I just find it's incredibly difficult to try to do direct comparisons, but it definitely is a much different atmosphere, I guess, for business. You get the kinds of issues like you see with the executive that's currently on extradition trials with the U.S. right now.
Yeah.
Because of state ties to China and things like that. It's just certain things that you don't see necessarily.
Well, especially when companies are suspected or been highly suspected of being working for the U.S. or for the Chinese government. So it's or doing corporate espionage and stuff like that. So it's it's kind of something that we know that's going on, obviously, because it's really interesting that whenever you invent something, somebody else figures it out the next day, except it costs way less now. It's like, oh, interesting how that happens.
That's how it always has been, though, right?
Yeah.
It's always cheaper to do something the second time.
Yeah. Well, especially if you just take notes and You didn't actually put in all the research and development work, which is kind of the.
Yeah, I know the U.S. has accused China of abusing the copyright system, I believe, on many occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Though the U.S. does throw a lot of claims at China on a regular basis. So.
Yeah, and it's funny because sometimes the United States compares us to China with our subsidies for our farming industry and stuff like that, because in order for us to even have a farming industry, we need to subsidize it so that it's even compatible with the U.S. market. And the U.S. economy and the U.S. Government really don't like that, and they feel like that's cheating. Yet,
well,
technically, technicalities it is, but it's in the people's interest to have farms and jobs in farming industries that provide local economies.
Exactly.
So
and the U.S. of course doesn't like that because that's taking away from their local economy.
Well, unfortunately,
it's one of those sides that no one's ever going to agree on it.
Of course,
you
of
find
course.
A balance, but
of course,
both
but
sides inherently have opposite takes.
Of course,
it's inherently going against each other to change it.
Of course, it's always going to be like that until, well, regions always look out for the best interest of themselves, obviously, and it only makes sense that you want to keep the economy local, or you want to try and support each other and support an economy where people have jobs, high-paying jobs there in their communities, and not having one corporate owner own all the franchises, and then he just lives in California and then basically just gets checks in the mail for sitting in California while all the money and all the trade is being done in in Canada, let's say. And I guess that's the whole franchising institution. Every Starbucks or every restaurant like that are owned by shareholders and people that it's not even owned by entrepreneurs at this point. It's owned by corporate entities.
Yeah, like I know it was, especially in Canada recently, a couple of the big highlights, of course, was Zellers getting sold to Target.
Yep.
That went really well. Target, how many years were they here? Couple? Then they just disappeared and just took our only other competition that wasn't Walmart with them. So
and then now Sears is almost.
Sears is closed.
Sears completely closed. They will.
And it's great.
And apparently the Hudson's Bay is also not looking very fancy right now. It's it's very troubling to see.
Well, they've sold off everything except the
pretty
Hudson's
much
Bay now.
Pretty much.
They've been cutting back for years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the whole epitome of buying everything on Amazon and buying everything online. It's the death of actual malls and the death of stores. And once that happens, then we'll have exactly what happens in the United States, where Amazon has its own bookstores, where Amazon is literally the entity that has the online aspect and the shopping aspect. And then it'll be, finally, maybe in our dimension, we'll have the Walmart Amazon conglomerate coalition that'll happen.
I find it intriguing that one of the largest companies on the planet started as an online book retailer.
It's really weird that
I just find that like every single time I think about that, it just like
the ultimate middleman became the world superpower through being the world's richest man.
Books, that's the breakthrough. It's I always just find that it's like you'd never think that that's where the big money is. Books, like
ebooks, the whole thing.
They just got in at the right time in that market because ebooks blew up.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Audible and everything.
With Audible, and now their streaming website and their music streaming. It's and now you have Google doing the same thing, and Disney is doing the same thing. Disney literally owns, I think it was 27 or 28% of all movies, all Hollywood movies. That's incredible. And now all those movies that are currently on, you know, Netflix and Amazon, all those things, it's all going to be taken down when I think later this year, maybe in 2020, they're going to be launching their own streaming service. Another $14 a month, guys. Woo!
Remember when everyone left cable because they didn't want to have to pay for 15 different channels to see the stuff they wanted?
There we go. This is the market adapting to make sure that you still have to pay for every sweet dollar that you for your entertainment. Which, I mean, that's the whole point. If, you know, it depends. It's nice when it's specified to your interests, so, you know, you can pay for what you're interested in and not have to pay for what you're not interested in. But, you know, it really depends on your interests at that point.
To me, it's the exclusivity. It's the fact that they make money by having these contracts with these other companies, but it's just I find it interesting that nowadays the digital world seems to be going towards everyone having their own way of directly selling to the consumer. No one wants to give anybody else a cut. It's just interesting to... It's extremely inconvenient for the customers, but I can see why they do it.
I mean, at some point we'll strike the happy medium and maybe come to the point where things may become differently. But it's really gonna become it's gonna go worse before it can get better, I think. And especially with even the media industry and the entertainment industry, it's all, there's literally 4 companies that own the entire industry.
Okay, Dom,
basically.
I have the solution. You said Disney's going to launch their own streaming service, right?
Yeah.
Disney just needs to buy everything. And then they'll have everything on their streaming service.
Essentially, that's what they're trying to do. But that's what Amazon's also trying to do, and Google or Alphabet, because that's the company that owns them.
Pay for one streaming service, only one person will own everything. It'll be beautiful, Dom. It'll be beautiful.
But then you know what happens?
No price control, so
exactly. Then the ultimate
the
no competition, because they'll be so great that there won't be any competition.
Then they won't make any money. It's the natural balance. The capitalist levers will pull everything back into check.
It's interesting.
Will self-regulate.
It's really weird how we went to, the beginning where, religions would control the politics, and then we have, kings would control the politics. Then we went to parliaments, and now we're in the state of, states, and then now we're in the post-state era where now, special interest groups and lobbying firms and companies are the ones playing the game and controlling the over borders.
Did you say the globalists?
Oh, well, there are people that they don't see borders, and that's definitely the postmodernist agenda is globalism, and the
Stephen Harper's Anywheres.
Well, Stephen Harper is an interesting character. He's got a lot of interesting policies.
His book had an interesting discussion on his anywheres versus somewheres. People that identify with a specific place and people that identify as more of a inter-border kind of businessmen that travel from country to country every day, so to speak, and they don't really identify with being from one particular place.
Of course, they're a human citizen, a citizen of humanity or of Earth, instead of it being of just a country, and kind of nationalism is kind of has a bad stigma and has a negative connotation to it now, which.
Well,
I feel like
surprised that it got a negative connotation.
Well, here's the thing: anything that is high energy or high potential, or it's high risk, and anything worth anything has the potential to be used for good or for bad. It can go either way, and making nuclear energy, it's really good when you can use it to use for energy purposes, but when you're using it for weaponry, that's obviously the negative aspect. So anything that's worth doing anything, or anything that we're trying to advance and progress in the physics fields and those kinds of fields, it definitely does have the potential to be very dangerous and be weaponized. That's always going to be a possibility with anything we do, but obviously we have to mitigate that. So nationalism, like ideologies, they can be, phased with good cultures and perhaps, have a good foundation of the ideology of how the world works and have a good definition, and then that could make it work. But also it can be used for bad, and it can be manipulated to use people and in negative ways. And I feel like just because people weren't smart enough to do it in history doesn't mean we can't. Now we have states that have state democracies where as a collective we can make decisions that we can make agreements and bring order and be more in a place where things are better off than they were before and less chaotic. And I feel like that's something we've been really successful at, and doesn't mean that it has to be a balance. It can't just be one thing or one ideology. It has to be a balance. So it's all about striking a balance in politics, really. I mean, what's your take on nationalism versus globalism and sovereignty? What is sovereignty where you get people from a certain city, and people for a certain province identifying as themselves as a culture, and where do you draw lines to say these people as an identity, like say like Quebec, or to say well, these people are a distinct culture, they're a distinct people, and they they have a certain status that gives them the right to impose language laws and impose certain circumstances like that, so that they can preserve their heritage. What are your thoughts on that?
I find that what really would define like a particular group of people is very fluid depending on your situation. Like what I'm basically trying to say is that, for example, you can have a culture that's defined as being everything being rather the same, where you could define it as, well, roughly, it's a lack of anything particularly unique that sets it apart, or it could be something very specific that a culture identifies with. It could be over a wide area. It could be over a small area. You can identify with multiple. You can be a strong, proud Quebecer and still be proud of being a Canadian.
I feel like that's the whole point, is like it can be interfaceted, and to a certain extent they overlap. And that's the thing with, especially in Canada, like in Canada, I'm born in Winnipeg, I'm Manitoban, yet I'm from Manitoba, yet I don't hold a grudge against other provinces, or I don't have no malice because I'm from Manitoba. Yet there is it's nice to feel like a certain patriotic nature that I was born in Saint Boniface, that's where I come from, that's where I grew up. So it's nice to have that. That's part of my heritage and part of your history, and it really does define who you are. Your surroundings, your everything about you is really defined by your life and your surroundings, and nature and a bit of nature and nurture, both of them. And that's kind of the point of having specialities in areas. And I was having these debates the other day on when globalism and capitalism destroyed sports and made sports not, it made it commodity. It commoditized it, and it made it not even, it lost all speciality when, you have a team that's from a certain area, and you have like the Montreal Quebec team, or you have the Toronto Maple Leafs, and to be on that team you need to be from Quebec, or you're on the team where you're from. That's because That's just the nature of your team, right? That's like how teams work. So when they changed the game, when they decided to start, trading players for money and starting, really marketing the players and doing stuff like that, then it was no longer about, national or regional interests, or like, oh yeah, my team's scored more goals than your team, like the rivalry that, it was no longer about what teams were, who's better in sports. It's now
different. Rivalries are still an incredible part of sports, and the teams aren't
it is
necessarily from that particular region.
It is, but it's no longer
exist. It's in the minor leagues. The point is that for the top tiers of players, there is no one town that can field an entire team's worth of NHL players.
Well, of course
There's
not.
Like
of course
one
not.
NHL player that comes out of some of these towns.
Exactly,
like
but
how many people,
but that was back then when there was like 6 or 18 teams and not 50.
What
right?
I'm talking about here is it's an issue of scale. There's still sports leagues that exist very nationally. Like, for example, you have the college.
There is the college
and
leagues and stuff like that. You're
but even
right.
then,
But the National League, the football league,
because those people aren't from those states necessarily. These people
You're right.
are in from other states on scholarships.
You're right.
So it's like, where do you define a local team?
That
it's just as you go lower and lower down the tiers of sports, your teams are getting more and more local. And then as you move more and more professionally, well, you have to compact players from a larger area into specific teams. So
but it doesn't become fair where instead of it being, oh, well, this area, because of their uprising and their culture and the way because the way they live, they're genuinely better at hockey, let's say.
Have you heard of the World Championships?
But, well, of course, the World Championships, but the best players are now exempt. They can't even play at the Olympics because they don't want their players to get injured. And that's the whole point
that was a contract issue.
Of course, it always is because the corporate side of things. And now you have that's the whole point I'm trying to make. You have teams, you have wealthy teams, and that's the whole point. The wealthy teams are the ones that can make all the decisions because they're the ones that can buy the best players. Of course, there's the whole drafting system in certain leagues, but it's really about of course, there's certain rules, of course, but it's still about the money instead of it being about the actual skills and the actual integrity of the sport.
Well, the skills are an incredible part because skills makes the money, dog. Sports is at an all-time high for the most skilled players because people are making enough money to dedicate their entire life to it.
What I'm trying to make the point is,
if you put a hockey player from now against a hockey player from 30 years ago, they'd mop the floor with them.
Sure, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that the actual event that people go to see, it's no longer the hockey game, it's no longer the football game. The actual event that the corporate, the corporations are really looking at it's a cash cow. And what is it? It's actually all about the intermission. It's all really about the Gatorade ads and all about the ads that they're feeding you while you're at the game and the $9 beers that you're drinking. That's their narrative. That's what they're really interested in. They couldn't care less about the sports and the lines on a map. They couldn't care less about cultures and heritages, and that's the whole point. When you have globalism, the whole point of having a cuisine where it's like to find a specific cuisine, you need to travel across the world to find a specific restaurant, and that's the beauty of being able to have a special something where you actually have to go find it instead of it having it trying to reduce a culture down to having it available everywhere. That's what we were trying to do with having a McDonald's on every corner, having a Subway on every corner, instead of saying, well, it's nice when I go to a different place, I'm unfamiliar with their restaurants, so I need to adapt, I need to try their cuisine. And it's not there's literally like hamburger stations at every single city in the world, and that's
so you opposed to having other cultures' foods in your country.
Well, I'm saying that when you try, well, here's the thing: when you try to when you try to do everything, when you're a corporation and you literally try to get everybody's cultural food ethnic foods right, you're not gonna get it all right, because these guys, they've been making their food for generations, and they've been working at it for their entire lives. And then you have a corporation that like, well, we're just gonna pour a little bit of money and research into it and blah blah boom, and we're gonna just reduce it down to its core materialist value, and then we're going to sell it. And it's robbing it of its special nature, and it's it reduces the magic of anything, right?
So to be clear, the sports analogy's out the window at this point, right?
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that to say that having players that aren't from your area on your team would be like saying that having restaurants from another culture in your town is bad.
I'm not saying it's bad. You can do it. It's just when...
I'm just finding it hard to see where the connection is between the hockey players not being from the home team and then the argument about... Because I understand your cuisine argument about
listen,
one company trying to be all the cuisine.
That's what my point. When you go to a restaurant and you see that there's literally... The menu is 20 pages... You know that the quality is going to be garbage. Why? Because when you're somebody that says they can do everything, that's wrong. You're gonna do a half-ass job of it, and that's the whole point. We're at a point where you want specific.
Yeah, will have a specialty, and then everything else is.
You want it. Yeah, that's right. You want places that have a specialty or have special daily items, and that's because that'll be higher quality because they put more attention to detail to it. They actually put more effort into it right off the bat, because if you have less things to worry about, you're going to be more focused on it right off the bat. So, I guess that's the whole cuisine thing and the whole area distinction, which is the whole point of having different cultures. And it's nice to have different cultures and having different areas where, you can be proud of where you're from and be proud of that kind of, there's this place that, nowhere else can you find this kind of alcohol or this kind of whatever kind of thing they have in that area, right?
Yeah,
it's really cool
kind of things, yeah.
And that's the thing. If you just try and take it and try and commercialize it without giving it its, actual cultural backing and its actual, what actually the essence of it was, it really robs it from what it was. And it really, people forget the history of it, or people don't really appreciate it for what it was. And I guess that could be argued for literally all cuisines, or like literally everything, basically.
I suppose it depends how far back you go, right?
Exactly.
Like, for example, Italian cuisine is marked substantially by tomatoes, but it's a native plant in North America.
Exactly. It's only been introduced till
1600s. That
yeah.
didn't exist in Europe.
Exactly, yeah.
And now it's considered a staple of the Italian culture.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because at the time that would have been, using tomato sauce. That's not how we cook things here.
Of course.
So it's interesting to see how these
it's interesting because it was the Mediterranean. It was a Mediterranean diet, more or less.
I believe it was very fish heavy.
It was very fish heavy and very olive heavy.
I was gonna say the olives there are fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Every single time I've been to Europe, it's just okay. I need to find a good place to get olives because this.
Oh, it's so nice. It's so nice to travel in Spain and in parts of France like that where there are olive.
Like go to the farmers markets, just grab some olives. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It's, hopefully I'll be able to go back. I'm actually planning maybe to go. I'm doing a lot of traveling this summer, so that'll be interesting to see if I end up going to parts of Europe or I might be going to the United States. I'm not sure yet. I have to make decisions.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Planning a trip?
Planning a couple of trips and a few things like that. I guess we've been on for like an hour now, so it's been a pleasure.
Been a good time.
So I feel like right before we leave off, I just want to give you a chance to give us some last remarks and see what the future holds for you, and tell me anything you want to add to this. Yeah.
Ooh, future for me. Oh, well, looking forward to hopefully getting my master's done. finally gonna be able to buckle down on research for the next year. Hoping to get a paper out hopefully by the end of the summer. My supervisor talked about potentially doing a couple months in France. That'd be interesting. Doing some of my work over there. There's another group that's working on similar projects, but one of my coworkers is actually back working with the Mint again. But yeah, for me, it's kind of buckling down, trying to get the masters done, and who knows from there, maybe a position in Europe for a PhD, or the U.S., something like that. I kind of want to go abroad for it.
You're going places, man. You're definitely going places, and
we
it's
can
really
hope
great
so.
to see that. That's great. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Yeah. There we go. So it's. I want to thank you again. It's really appreciate taking the time and putting up with me.
Oh, don't worry. Putting up with you is a joy. It's
Very
just
good.
A joy. Ian, he's okay. He's
okay. Oh, well, that's all the time we have today. So I thank you, everybody, for taking a view. And we'll see you in the next episode. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Take care. Good night.